This is Hybrid Cognition, a narrated version of my Substack essays and field notes on AI, organizations, leadership, governance, and institutional change. The original article, related notes, and any companion tools are linked in the description. In the previous episode, I introduced the basic idea of hybrid cognition. The argument was simple. Human cognition is no longer exclusively human. Not because machines have become people, not because AI systems have intention, moral responsibility, or human-like agency, but because non-human systems increasingly participate in the reasoning processes through which organizations act. They generate analysis, they summarize options, they flag risks, they structure alternatives, they recommend courses of action. And when that happens, organizational cognition becomes hybrid. But that immediately creates a second question. If AI shapes the decision, who is actually acting? On the surface, this may sound like a philosophical question, but I don't think it is. At least, it's not only a philosophical question. It's also a practical governance question, because most organizations still operate with a very familiar assumption. People decide, and people are responsible. Executives make decisions, committees approve them, boards oversee them, organizations remain accountable for the outcomes. That model is not wrong, but it is becoming incomplete. Because increasingly, the human decision is only the final visible moment in a much longer cognitive process. By the time a person signs off, approves a recommendation, or chooses a direction, many of the important choices may already have been shaped upstream. A forecasting system may have selected the scenarios worth considering. A risk model may have filtered the available options. A compliance engine may have constrained the available paths. A ranking system may have ordered alternatives. A generative tool may have summarized the background in a particular way. An analytics platform may have emphasized some signals and ignored others. So when the executive finally says, "This is the decision," the question becomes, where did the decision actually begin? Did it begin in the meeting? Did it begin in the model? Did it begin in the data? Did it begin in the decision of the workflow? Did it begin when somebody decided what the system should optimize for? This is the illusion of sole decision-making. The decision still feels personal. The responsibility still feels clear. The executive reviews information, asks questions, weighs trade-offs, and makes a call. From the outside, the process looks human. But the field of possible choices has already been shaped. The options did not arrive neutrally. They were produced, filtered, ranked, framed, and constrained. The human actor is still acting, but not alone. And this is where we need to distinguish between two things that are often treated as if they were the same: influence and accountability. Influence means what meaningfully shapes the outcome. Accountability means who is formally responsible for the outcome. In traditional governance models, these two things were often closely aligned. Not perfectly, of course. Organizations have always had politics, processes, incentives, committees, consultants, reports, templates, and routines. No decision was ever purely individual. But still, the basic assumption remained. Human actors shape decisions, and human actors own them. Tools supported the decision. They did not participate in reasoning. Under hybrid cognition, that relationship changes. Influence can migrate faster than accountability. A system may shape which data is visible. It may shape which risks are highlighted. It may shape which options appear viable. It may shape which recommendation feels obvious. It may shape which outcome appears responsible, efficient, or safe. But accountability remains formally assigned or attached to a person, a committee, or an organization. This does not eliminate human responsibility. That is important. This is not an argument for saying the AI made me do it, but it does complicate responsibility. Because if systems meaningfully shape decisions, then governance has to reflect that influence. Otherwise, responsibility becomes formally assigned but structurally incomplete. Imagine a pricing decision. A company is deciding whether to raise prices in a certain segment. The leadership team sees a recommendation from the analytics system. The recommendation is based on historical customer behavior, margin data, competitive signals, churn predictions, and scenario modeling. The system suggests that prices can be raised with limited customer loss. The team discusses the recommendation and approves it. Later, the decision causes unexpected harm of some kind. Perhaps a certain group of customers is affected disproportionately, perhaps the churn model was wrong, perhaps the data reflected past biases, perhaps the recommendation optimized revenue while ignoring relationship damage. Now ask, who acted? The executive team approved the decision, but the system framed the decision. The model selected the relevant signals, the data defined the historical pattern, the optimization logic determined what good meant in this case. The dashboard shaped what the humans saw. The workflow determined where human judgment entered. So accountability cannot be understood only at the point of approval. It has to be understood across the whole decision architecture. And that is the core of the problem. When influence migrates, but accountability does not, governance becomes incoherent. Not necessarily illegal, not necessarily unethical, but incoherent. The organization still has signatures, roles, committees, and policies, but those structures may no longer correspond to how decisions are actually produced. Formal accountability remains in one place. Practical influence has moved elsewhere. This is why the question, who made the decision, is no longer enough. We also have to ask, who shaped the information, who structured the options, who selected the model, who set the thresholds, who defined the optimization target, who decided where human discretion would sit, who could challenge the recommendation, who could override it. And who would even know that an override was necessary? These are design questions. And that is why hybrid cognition is not just a technology issue. It is an institutional design issue. The goal is not to remove AI from decision making. In many cases, that would be neither realistic nor desirable. AI can improve decisions. It can surface patterns humans miss. It can reduce certain kinds of biases. It can expand the range of alternatives. It can make complex systems more legible. It can help organizations operate at a level of speed and complexity that human-only processes cannot sustain. But that only helps if the structure of influence is visible. If a system shapes a decision, the organization needs to know where and how. If a model filters options, that filtering has to be understood. If a recommendation changes the range of possible actions, that influence has to be acknowledged. If human judgment is expected to remain meaningful, the organization has to know where that judgment actually sits. Otherwise, the human becomes a ritual endpoint. A person signs off, a committee approves, a board is informed, but the real cognitive work has happened elsewhere. And that is a dangerous place for organizations to end up, because it creates the appearance of accountability without the architecture of accountability. This is especially important because hybrid cognition often enters organizations quietly. It does not always arrive as a major strategic transformation. Sometimes it arrives as a dashboard improvement, a scoring model, a workflow tool, a document summarizer, a co-pilot, a decision support system, an automated risk flag. Each tool seems limited. Each tool seems helpful. Each tool seems subordinate to human judgment. But over time, these systems begin to structure the environment in which judgment happens. They shape attention. They shape timing. They shape salience. They shape default assumptions. They shape what feels like a reasonable option. And once that happens, the organization's decision-making has changed, even if the formal governance model has not. That is what I mean by distributed agency. Again, not agency in the sense that machines have become moral persons. That's not what I'm saying. Not agency in the sense that AI becomes responsible, but agency in the organizational sense, the capacity to shape action. If an AI system meaningfully shapes, what an organization does, then agency is no longer located only in human actors. It is distributed across humans, systems, data, workflows, and governance structures. The question becomes, how do we govern that distribution? One practical way to begin is to map a decision process. Not the whole organization, just one consequential decision. Pricing, hiring, risk scoring, capital allocation, clinical prioritization, compliance review, customer segmentation. Take one process and ask, where does analysis enter? Where does the system filter options? Where does it recommend action? Where does it constrain possible outcomes? Where does human judgment sit? Where can somebody challenge the system? Where is accountability explicitly assigned? And where does influence exist without ownership? The purpose of this kind of mapping is not to slow everything down. It is to make the structure visible. Because once you can see the structure, you can redesign it. You can decide where stronger human oversight is needed. You can decide where automated authority is acceptable. You can decide where accountability should sit. You can decide which system outputs require explanation. You can decide when a recommendation should be treated as advice and when it is effectively already a decision. The key distinction is not whether AI influence is large or small. The key distinction is whether it is deliberate. Some organizations may choose to keep humans firmly in control. Others may intentionally delegate more authority to systems in specific bounded contexts. Both can be legitimate. What is no longer viable is accidental governance. Accidental governance is what happens when influence migrates informally while accountability remains formally unchanged. The system shapes the decision, the human owns the outcome. But no one has designed the relationship between these two. That may work while outcomes are good. It may even appear efficient. But when something goes wrong, the weaknesses become visible. The organization may struggle to explain why the decision was made. Leaders may struggle to justify their own authority. Governance teams may discover that oversight existed on paper, but not in the actual flow of influence. And responsibility may diffuse precisely when clarity is needed most. This is why hybrid cognition reframes human agency rather than removing it. Executives remain responsible, organizations remain accountable. Human judgment still matters, but humans are no longer the sole cognitive authors of many decisions. And if authorship is hybrid, governance has to become more deliberate. That is the central argument. When reasoning becomes distributed, influence migrates. When influence migrates, governance must adapt. Not reactively, not only after a failure, but deliberately, because the future of organizational decision-making is not simply human or machine, it is human and machine embedded in systems, workflows, metrics, models, and institutions. So the real question is no longer only who made the decision, it is who shaped the decision before anyone thought they were deciding. And has the organization designed accountability around that reality? If the answer is no, then hybrid cognition has already arrived, but governance has not caught up. If you want to read the original essay, follow the links in the description. I've also included any related field notes, companion tools, and references there. Thanks for listening.